When did you start working for the government?
1977.
And were you working at the National Toxicology Program and the NIEHS in 1983?
Yes, I was.
Are you familiar with the IBT scandal?
To some degree.
Are you aware, if anything, about the original animal carcinogenicity study done to support the registration of Roundup in the 70s?
Yeah, I believe I cite it in my review of the literature. Let me take a quick look here. Yes, I cited in my review of the literature. Yes, I am aware of the study.
Let's turn to Exhibit 504. As you can see, this is Exhibit 504. And you can see at the front of this is a report that was prepared by the Environmental Protection Agency in July of 1983. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And what we have here is a report, and it's titled Summary of the IBT Review Program, Office of Pesticide Programs. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Do you know what this document is concerning?
Yes, it summarizes the actual review of the IBT process. They talk about how it was done, what was done, and then they give the statistics on what studies were retracted, what studies are still in contested, and what studies were actually acceptable, because some of them were acceptable studies.
This is page 19 of the document. And as you see, there's a chart here. Do you see that, sir?
Yes, I do see the chart on the screen.
And what we have here is this table. And if you look right here, it discusses glyphosate. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And then it has in the columns the different types of studies. Is that right?
That is correct.
I've highlighted one called oncogenicity. What is that?
That's the animal cancer studies.
Okay. And if we go down here, there's a little symbol that says 0 equals IBT. Do you see that?
Yes.
All right. And if we look under glyphosate, under the oncogenicity study, there's 1 0. Is that right?
That's correct.
What does that indicate?
That indicates there's only one study that's available at the time of this report on the carcinogenicity of glyphosate in laboratory rodents, and that study is by IBT.
Okay. And I don't know if you're familiar with these terms, but you might be considering your experience. You know what data call-in means?
In EPA parlance, that means they're asking for data to come in to fill gaps in our understanding of the particular compound.
All right. And if we look here, there's another column that says mutagenicity. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
What is mutagenicity?
That's the genotoxicity data mostly.
And here, there's 4 zeros and 1 X for mutagenicity in glyphosate. What does that mean?
There are 5 studies, 4 of which are from IBT and 1 of which is from somewhere else.
And if you look right here, it's discussing, what is this discussing here?
These appear to be all of the IBT studies that were done for glyphosate. They each have a number, and then what the study is, and which animal, et cetera, were used.
All right. And then if you look right here, there's one I've highlighted. It says Monsanto carcinogenicity mouse. Do you see that?
B569. Yes, I do.
And it has under the validate column the letter I. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
All right. Is that letter I defined anywhere in the paper?
I means invalid. The information in the final report was not supported by the raw data from the study.
What does that mean, sir?
It's one of the retracted studies from the IBT labs.
Okay. So as of 1983, the only carcinogenicity study that had been done on glyphosate had been deemed invalid by the EPA. Is that right?
As far as I understand, that is correct.
Between the early 70s and 1983, while Roundup was being sold, were there any valid mice carcinogenicity studies available?
No.
So for every single mouse study there's a positive lymphoma finding.
Of some sort. I'm sorry. Yes, there is some indication of a lymphoma in every single mouse study.
So we're exhibit 388. So let's go through these categories of applying the EPA standards to the data that we've reviewed, okay? The first one is this descriptor indicates strong evidence of human carcinogenicity. Let's start off with the second bullet point. This descriptor, exceptionally, this descriptor may be equally appropriate with a lesser weight of epidemiological evidence that is strengthened by other lines of evidence. It can be used when all the following conditions are met. There is strong evidence of an association between human exposure and either cancer or key precursor events of the agent's mode of action, but not enough for a causal association. And there is extensive evidence of carcinogenicity in animals, and the mode of carcinogenic action and associated key precursor events have been identified in animals, and there is strong evidence that the key precursor events that precede the cancer response in animals are anticipated to occur in animals and in humans and progress to tumors based on available biological information. With all those characteristics, have we met all of those to definitively state, beyond a reasonable doubt, that glyphosate is carcinogenic?
Not quite.
Let's go to the second characterization, carcinogenic to humans. We actually covered this earlier. Recall that?
You're going to likely to be carcinogenic
Yeah,
to humans?
likely. It starts off at the bottom page. Likely to be carcinogenic to humans, and moves on to the next page. Do you see that?
Yes.
And in your opinion, have we met the criteria to fit this category?
Yes, we have.
Okay. So, for example, bullet point number 2, an agent has tested positive in experimental animals in more than one species, sex, strain, site, or exposure route, with or without evidence of carcinogenicity in humans. Do we have that?
Yes, we have met that bullet.
So we have here with or without evidence of carcinogenicity in humans, but do we have evidence of carcinogenicity in humans as well?
Yes, we have an association.
So we have evidence that falls, in your opinion, somewhere between likely carcinogenic to humans and definitively carcinogenic. Is that right?
That is correct.
Do you know what the EPA has concluded?
Yes, I do.
What have they concluded?
Not likely to be carcinogenic to humans.
All right. So below likely carcinogenic to humans is the next category. That's suggestive evidence of carcinogenic potential. Do you see that?
Yes, I see that.
And the EPA thinks it's not even up to this point, right?
That is correct.
Do you agree with that?
No.
It says right here, a small and possibly not statistically significant increase in tumor incidence observed in a single animal or human study that does not reach the weight of evidence for the descriptor likely to be carcinogenic to humans. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
To be clear, even on what's represented in the EPA's paper, the one that you gave an F to, is that criteria met?
Yes, it is.
So even on what the EPA's own said, on their own standards, they should be suggestive evidence of carcinogenicity.
That is correct.
But it's below that, is that right?
Yes, it is.
What direction is the EPA's conclusion relative to this one?
Exactly the opposite direction.
Okay. So let's go down further. Inadequate information to assess carcinogenic potential. What's this category?
This is what I would call the catch-all category. If it doesn't fit in any other category, this is where you put it. And basically, it's for cases where the information is so little that you can't make a decision, or it's so conflicted that you can't make a decision.
And so, do you believe that we have little information with glyphosate?
No.
Okay. But even if it's conflicting evidence, it would go into this category?
If it was completely balanced conflict that you could not resolve, you would put it in this category.
Did the EPA put it in this category?
No, they did not.
Did they put it in a higher or lower category?
Lower with regard to the carcinogenicity.
All right, so we're here at the very bottom. Not likely to be carcinogenic to human. It says this descriptor is appropriate when the available data are considered robust for deciding that there is no basis for human hazard concern. In some instances, there can be positive results in experimental animals when there are strong consistent evidence that each mode of action in experimental animals does not operate in humans. I'm going to stop right there. It's saying, hey, you can have positive data and it's still in this category. Does that apply to glyphosate?
Glyphosate does have positive data in the animal studies, but there is no consistent evidence that the mechanism by which those cancers occur in the animals do not occur in humans.
I mean, when we look at the tumor chart, right, we have study after study with lymphoma in it, and we have epidemiological data with humans getting lymphoma. Is that consistent data?
That is consistent data.
So this category of not likely to be carcinogenic to humans, what is this category reserved for?
Cases where you have very convincing evidence that nothing is happening whatsoever. So the classic example here would be something where you've done 3 or 4 animal studies. All of them are solid negative studies. There's absolutely nothing there for you to be concerned with. You've done the mechanism studies. Those are completely negative across the board. Or if they're positive, they're positive in a way that can't possibly occur in humans, and you can demonstrate that. And then you'd want 1 or 2 negative epidemiology studies at least.
So if we go to my cancer stool, right? Let's hypothetically assume for glyphosate, all we had was the animal studies. Could you put it in the lowest category?
Definitely not.
If you had just the mechanistic studies, could you put it in the lowest category?
No.
If you had just the epidemiology, could you put it in the lowest category?
No, I could not.
But if you have all 3, like we do here, is it scientifically justified to put it in that category?
It is not scientifically justified to call glyphosate not likely to be carcinogenic to humans.
And did you raise this issue with the EPA?
I did raise this issue with the EPA.
Why did you do that?
Again, because they've inappropriately applied the science time after time after time to reach that conclusion, and it's an inappropriate conclusion for this particular compound.
I mean, you sure worked in government for over 30 years, working on issues of public health. When you see something like this, what's your reaction to it?
I feel as if they have let down the American public.
You were asked some questions about IBT. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
As I read, you submitted a couple reports, correct?
That is correct.
As I've read your reports, there's no discussion in your reports about that issue, correct?
Not that I recall.
And is that generally true of your reports? You discussed a lot of the science on glyphosate, correct?
That is correct.
And a lot of the studies on glyphosate, correct?
That is correct.
As I read your reports, they don't focus on historical events within Monsanto. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And in part, that's because you've not read the Monsanto testimony. Is that correct?
I've read some of the Monsanto testimony, but it's just not my area of interest.
Okay, it's not your area of interest, and you've not reviewed the entire Monsanto document set.
That is correct.
Now, sticking with the IBT issue, have you reviewed the full testimony and the full documents regarding that issue to see how it was addressed?
So, having been at the National Toxicology Program, I was aware of the IBT situation before this came around. And so I did have some knowledge of it. I have reviewed the 2 or 3 documents on the IBT issue that relate to glyphosate, and at least mention glyphosate in it.
Okay. Do you know if those 2 or 3 documents are the complete universe of documents on how that issue was addressed as to glyphosate?
No, I don't know that.
Since that issue, you understand that there have been extensive studies on glyphosate?
Yes.
And that includes a dozen rodent studies you reviewed, correct?
Correct.
And that EPA reviewed, correct?
EPA reviewed some of them.
And that they found, based on their review, did not demonstrate carcinogenicity, correct?
That was their opinion. That is correct.
You were asked about whether studies were conducted between 1970 and 1983. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
You do recall that there was a rat study conducted during that time period, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
I want to switch gears and ask you about some of the work that you've done, that you've dedicated your career to. I'm going to get the year wrong probably, and I apologize for that, but I believe you said you retired in 2013. Is that accurate?
That I retired
In 2013.
2013, yes.
Okay, so I was right. In the time period before you retired, I suspect you would tell us that you devoted your career working for different agencies on important issues.
I would hope so, yes.
And probably the most important issue you focused your career on was cancer.
That's a tough question.
Okay.
That's a
Let me ask
very
it
tough
differently,
question.
then I don't want to box you in. Was that a very important issue that you devoted a major portion of your career to, cancer?
Certainly my research career, absolutely. To some of the evaluations that I was focused on, yes.
And I think you just answered what I wanted to ask you next. That included looking at the causes of cancer, correct?
That is correct.
If I heard you correctly, a major part of your job was to figure out methods and ways in which chemicals can cause cancer.
Right, but
Okay.
I should be fair. Running the NTP is more finding the causes of cancer.
Okay.
To be fair, that statement's correct as well.
Okay. And included specific work like making recommendations on identified causes of cancer in the report on carcinogens.
Absolutely.
So with that 30-year career, there was no point in that 30-year career. You carried out your responsibilities as best you could, correct?
That is correct.
At the NTP?
Yes.
In your work on the report on carcinogens?
Yes.
In your work in your lab at NIEHS?
Yes.
In your work at the CDC?
Yes.
In that period, there was no time in that period where you came to the judgment that glyphosate was a cause of cancer, true?
That is true.
I think you've testified that prior to the IARC review, you never even thought about glyphosate in any meaningful detail. I know we've got the article that I'm going to show you in just a moment, but you never gave it in-depth consideration.
That is correct.
Even though you were doing your best to do your job in those various positions we have talked about, correct?
Correct. None of those positions involved pesticides, actually.
Okay. One of those positions involved looking at the causes of cancer, the National Toxicology Program, true?
But not pesticides.
Okay.
Because-
Causes generally.
Yeah, but because pesticides, any testing for pesticides is a negotiated point between EPA and the regulated community. NTP really never does pesticide studies and never deals with them.
They did a pesticide study in 1992 when they looked at glyphosate, true?
That was a short-term toxicity study that was at the request of EPA.
Okay. And it was a study on glyphosate,
It
correct?
was, but it's unusual.
And at the report on carcinogens, your job was to recommend things that should be included in the report on carcinogens, correct?
Correct.
And I think what you have testified, but tell me if you agree with this, is in the case of glyphosate, no one really thought it was carcinogenic until after the IARC review. Is that accurate?
I would say that's probably accurate.
So I promised I'd show you your article one more time. That's what I want to put in front of you, if I could. Exhibit 1657, your article with Dr. Resnick from 2005. Do you recall this article?
Yes.
To orient the jury to this article, we've already seen this article, but just to orient us to this article, this is an article on pesticide testing on human subjects by you and Dr. Resnick, correct?
Correct.
And if we look down at the bottom, it's from July 2005, correct?
Correct.
Do you recall talking about the fact that in this article, specifically on page 3, you discuss at least one study that had looked at the question of glyphosate and carcinogenicity, the McDuffie study?
Yes.
And that's one of the studies you rely on this case, correct?
Correct.
And at that time, after reading the McDuffie article, you had not concluded that glyphosate caused NHL in humans, correct?
Correct.
Nowhere in this article do you offer a conclusion about glyphosate being carcinogenic, correct?
I don't think it's even mentioned in the article.
You might have answered this already, Doctor, but do you agree with me that a regulatory agency like the United States Environmental Protection, part of their role is to protect human health in certain areas?
EPA's legal mandate is to protect the health of the people of the United States in certain areas where they have legal authority to do that. They are a public health agency.
A few minutes ago, we looked at the EPA statement in 1991 that glyphosate should be classified as a Group E, evidence of non-carcinogenicity for humans. Do you recall that?
Yes.
In 1993, 2 years later, are you aware that EPA issued another document addressing glyphosate?
I'd have to see the document. Obviously, EPA releases a lot of documents.
Let's take a look at it. If we put it up on the screen and look at the second page, do you see where it says EPA re-registration eligibility decision glyphosate? Do you see that, Doctor?
I see that, yes.
Let's go to page 7 of this document. Are you with me? The page is a little tough in this document. It's actually the first numbered or unnumbered page. It would be numbered if they had a number on it. EPA RED facts glyphosate. Do you have that there in front of you?
Yes, I do.
Let's look at this first paragraph. It states, all pesticides sold or distributed in the United States must be registered by EPA based on scientific studies showing that they can be used without posing unreasonable risks to people or the environment. Did I read that correctly?
You did read that correctly.
And are you aware of that being, in fact, a true statement?
That is, in fact, a true statement under FIFRA.
In the next sentence, it says, because of advances in scientific knowledge, the law requires that pesticides which were first registered years ago be re-registered to ensure that they meet today's more stringent standards. Did I read that correctly?
You read that correctly.
And do you understand that to be also an accurate statement of how the process works for pesticides?
Yes.
If we go to the next page, which is page 9 of the document, numbered page 2. Do you see where they state several chronic toxicity carcinogenicity studies using rats, mice, and beagle dogs resulted in no effects based on the parameters examined or resulted in findings that glyphosate was not carcinogenic in the study. Did I read that correctly?
You read that correctly.
And then they make reference to the Group B classification, evidence of non-carcinogenicity from 1991 that we discussed earlier. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Then at the bottom they state, one reproductive toxicity study using rats showed kidney effects in the high-dose male pups. Another study showed digestive effects and decreased body weight gain. Glyphosate does not cause mutations. Did I read that correctly?
You read that correctly.
Let me show you another document, sir, Exhibit 1179. I'm going to ask you if you've seen this document before.
I can't be certain.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I just can't.
That's okay. Let's look at the second page. Do you see that this document has the EPA logo up at the top?
Yes, I do.
And this document is dated April 20th, 1998. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And the subject is Glyphosate Report of the Hazard Identification Assessment Review Committee. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
Are you familiar with what that committee is?
These committees change their name all the time. I'm not sure what it is.
Fair enough. Let's look ahead to page 7. And do you see that on page 7, about halfway down, there's a heading, Classification of Carcinogenic Potential?
Yes, I do.
It states, the OPP Cancer Peer Review Committee classified glyphosate as a Group E pesticide, no evidence for carcinogenicity in acceptable species. Did I read that correctly?
Almost, in 2 acceptable species.
In 2 acceptable species. We're now up to 1998, correct?
It appears, yes.
Are you aware of a World Health Organization group called the JMPR?
Yes, I am.
What does JMPR stand for?
Joint Meeting on Pesticide Residues.
And do you understand them to have a public health mission?
Yeah, I guess that would be the correct terminology for what they do.
Have you reviewed their work on glyphosate?
Yes, I have.
I'm passing you Exhibit 1668. Let's look at the second page of this document. You see where it says the report of the joint meeting of the FAO panel of experts on pesticide residues in food and the environment and the WHO core assessment group on pesticide residues, Rome, Italy, September 2004. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And have you seen the conclusions? This is what we've been referring to as JMPR, correct?
Correct.
Have you seen the conclusions of JMPR cited in various documents you've reviewed in connection with this litigation, regulatory documents and publications?
Yes, I have.
If we go to page 102 of this document, please. Do you recognize them as an authoritative entity?
In what sense?
In terms of the work that they do, evaluating things like, in this case, glyphosate.
They are certainly recognized as an authoritative entity.
Okay.
I
Thank
have
you.
not thought whether I would concur with that statement, and I'm not willing to do that on the fly. I'm not especially pleased with what they've done with any of the things I've looked at from them.
Does that include glyphosate?
Yes, it does.
Do you see that this is a discussion of glyphosate?
Well, the whole document's on glyphosate.
Actually, if you look at the document, it's on various pesticides.
Oh,
This
okay.
section is glyphosate. Do you see that?
Yes.
If you look at 102, I just want to point out a couple things in these two pages. First, if we look at the bottom, do you see where they say genotoxicity?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Do you see where they conclude no genotoxic potential?
Yes, I see that.
If we go to the next page, do you see where they talk? Do you see at the top where they talk about carcinogenicity?
Yes, I do.
And do you see where they conclude no evidence of carcinogenicity in rats or mice?
Yes, I do.
And if we look further down, they have a section called medical data. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And in that section, do you see where they conclude medical surveillance of workers in plants producing and formulating glyphosate plants did not reveal any adverse health effects? Do you see that?
I see that.
Doctor, am I correct that prior to 2015, all of the health agencies that had looked to the data and come to final conclusions had concluded that glyphosate was not carcinogenic?
Can't be clear on that.
Do you recall giving testimony in April of 2018? Doctor?
I'm looking to make sure, yes.
Okay.
Now I know what it is.
It's 462, lines 2 through 7. Let me ask you to read that and tell me when you've had a chance to read those lines.
Okay.
And I'll read it and ask you if I've read it correctly. The question is the one I just asked, and I'm correct that prior to 2015, all of the health agencies that had looked to the data and come to final conclusions had concluded that glyphosate was not carcinogenic. Your answer, to the best of my understanding, yes. Did I read that correctly?
You read it correctly.
Were you being truthful at that time?
The correct answer would be, of the agencies I know of that had reviewed it and I have looked at, prior to 2015, they were, their findings were not carcinogenic. But I don't know every agency in the world.
Would the same statement be accurate as to 2013, that of the agencies you know of that have reviewed glyphosate prior to 2013, their findings were not carcinogenic?
Yes.